Hello, everyone. Just doing a check-in video. Do these periodically just to keep in touch during the week. Um, Looking at the discussion board, very glad to see a very lively and intelligent set of posts and responses to posts there. Very good. I mean, let's keep this up. That's exactly what the discussion board is for. Seeing your responses to Kant and Mill, to Kantianism and utilitarianism, I saw really some great ideas there. Obviously, I have about all I have to say in the videos that I posted about Kant and Mill. Maybe just to say a couple more things, just as a supplement as I look over things. I really this is not a class in moral theory. This is the only time that we'll be doing something like this, and our purposes are very practical, sort of ruthless, sort of tearing out from Kant and Mill something that we can use immediately when we move on to particular topics and we move through this exploration of computer ethics or digital ethics and different things we'll be talking about. So we're not trying to gain a comprehensive and nuanced grasp of Kant and Mill. We'd have to read the books from which these excerpts come and do a lot of thinking. It would be a whole class, but that's okay. I mean, a lot of questions are raised here, a lot of interesting responses, and I'll be reviewing them next week when I do my review video for the week of the discussion board. But thinking about Kant and Mill, one of the things that I always say, and especially in a moral philosophy class, if it's a more extended view of these things, is that to a certain extent, we are all Kantians and we are all utilitarians. And that's what I find extremely interesting about these two moral philosophies. If we dug a little further, I think we could see that they are incompatible. That is, to be a Kantian is to reject the consequentialism that goes along with being a utilitarian. And to be a utilitarian means to reject the claim on the part of Kant that it is the intentions behind an action, really basically whether the intention is in accord with one of the categorical imperatives that matters and that makes an action a morally good one. So they are incompatible, yet I'm pretty sure that everyone I've ever met is both. That is, we hold these very deeply entrenched ideas, principles about morality and how we approach morality. And there's just no question in my mind that everyone is a utilitarian. And people like Mill and earlier utilitarians like Bentham and others were relying on that idea that it is our natural approach to the world. That is, we try to, when we engage in actions, we try to have the best outcomes. And the best outcomes, they thought, were the outcomes that had the most beneficial effect on human beings. And that can be put in terms of happiness. That is, in every action that we do in good conscience, we, to a certain extent, are trying to maximize the amount of happiness in the world. I don't think there's any question about that. Sorry for the interruption. So I just wanted to get that across, that I think there's no question that the utilitarian point of view is just built in. One of the kind of interesting thing is when it gets formulated in this way by philosophers in this more rigorous way, and then we can sort of apply it in a more careful, critical way. I think that our viewpoints normally, when we go at things, are much more intuitive and not as well thought out, which is just life. But I think it's also true that, and maybe not quite as obvious at first, that Kantianism is just as deeply entrenched in our normal intuitive ways of dealing with moral situations. And those are really expressed in the two categorical imperatives here. the first one may not be quite as obvious as the second one, that we should treat people as ends in themselves rather than use them like things, I think is a very deeply felt thing in our way of dealing with human beings, and maybe with more than human beings, as has been suggested in the discussion board. Animals might deserve the same kind of treatment, or at least a similar treatment, or at least should not be used like things. But this notion that people need to be treated with respect, and that my freedom of action is quite limited when I'm dealing with a person as opposed to let's say, an inanimate object, I think is a very recognizable idea already to us. And the second version of the categorical imperative, that my maxim of action needs to be capable of being universal law, a law for everyone, I think that is also deeply entrenched, just insofar as we believe in consistency. That is, we believe in not being a hypocrite, to engage in any act that you would not recommend as something that everyone should do in a similar situation is, to a certain degree, to engage in hypocrisy. That is, to do something for probably for selfish reasons that you could not stand behind or would not want everyone else to do. I think that's the very definition of hypocrisy, and certainly we want to avoid that. So I think that looking at Kantianism and utilitarianism is a very interesting thing. First, because we find there's something very familiar about them. That what they say is certainly something that we resonate with already. Maybe we haven't formulated it consciously the way that Kant and Mill have, but we find that what they say, once we think about it, is something that's already at work in us. The second is that they are not utterly, but they are definitely incompatible, at least in their basics. They are different ways and incompatible ways of approaching morality, which says something about us, right? And maybe something about morality, that it may be that there is no one consistent way to approach morality. Certainly, people have pointed out the shortcomings of utilitarianism to a certain degree in the discussion board. I would suggest that there are also shortcomings to Kant, and that we kind of switch back and forth in our attitudes. Now, if this were a moral theory class, we could go into this in more depth, but the important thing, again, this week is to just get a sense of how a Kantian would approach a moral question in this sort of more rigorous way of articulating what the principles are, and how a utilitarian would.